Why were revolutionary African leaders like Patrice Lumumba, Muammar Gaddafi, and Thomas Sankara terminated? What made them so threatening to the West that assassination became the chosen course of action? Lumumba, the first Prime Minister of the Democratic Republic of Congo, was eliminated with the direct involvement of the Belgian government and the CIA. Gaddafi of Libya and Sankara of Burkina Faso met similar fates. The pattern is undeniable. They all stood against Western imperialism, rejected foreign domination, and sought to build independent, self-reliant African nations. Their growing influence and popularity made them dangerous, not to their people, but to Western interests. This is the uncomfortable truth behind the silence of many modern African leaders. For decades, they watched what happened to those who dared to resist. In fear of meeting the same end, they chose compliance, allowing foreign powers to dictate the terms of their nation's futures. But a shift is underway. A new generation of African leaders is rising, bold, unapologetic, and determined to take back control. Among them is Captain Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso. Traoré, a former soldier turned revolutionary leader, has stepped into dangerous territory. He's chosen the same path that cost Lumumba, Gaddafi, and Sankara their lives. Unlike others, he's fully aware of the risk, and yet he continues to speak out and act decisively against Western influence. Unsurprisingly, he has now become one of the West's top targets. Born in 1988 in Kera, a village in the Muham province of Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré's journey began modestly. After attending secondary school in Bobo Dioulasso and studying geology at the University of Ouagadougou, where he was known for his intelligence and humility, he entered the military in 2009. After training in Morocco, he was deployed to Kaya and later served under the UN peacekeeping mission MINUSMA in Mali in 2014, where he distinguished himself with bravery. Traoré returned to Burkina Faso in 2018 and fought on the front lines against a growing jihadist insurgency. By 2020, now a captain, he began championing the grievances of northern soldiers, who were frustrated with poor support from the government. His leadership during these times earned him respect and influence among the military ranks. In January 2022, Traoré backed a coup that deposed President Roch Kabore. But when the newly installed junta, led by Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba, failed to address the insecurity and continued to toe the Western line, Traoré once again stepped forward. Dissatisfied with Damiba's leadership, he led another popular and bloodless coup in October 2022, removing Damiba and becoming interim president himself. Since then, Traoré has taken bold steps to reorient Burkina Faso's foreign policy. He expelled French troops, challenging France's long-standing military presence in the Sahel. He began forming strategic partnerships with Russia and Turkey, while calling on neighboring Guinea and Mali to form a federation, signaling a serious push toward regional unity and Pan-African sovereignty. In April 2023, Traoré launched a mass mobilization campaign to confront terrorist groups, insisting that national security must come before elections. Though democratic polls were initially scheduled for July 2024, Traoré suggested that stability must come first, a statement that drew suspicion and condemnation from Western observers who fear that his continued leadership threatens their interests. By September 2023, the consequences of his stance became evident. A coup attempt against him, believed to be backed by foreign intelligence and carried out by factions loyal to the ousted Damiba regime, failed. Traoré, known for his resilience and strategic alliances, remained in power. Speculation has grown about Traoré's links to the Wagner Group, a Russian paramilitary organization. While he denied any direct cooperation, he made no secret of his admiration for Russia's support for sovereign African governments. Following the 2023 Russia-Africa Summit, he even announced the reopening of the Russian embassy in Burkina Faso. But perhaps the most significant move yet came with his diplomatic outreach to Venezuela. During a historic meeting with President Nicolás Maduro, held in Russia, the two leaders discussed bilateral cooperation and global solidarity. Maduro pledged full support for Burkina Faso's fight for liberation and even promised military aid to help stabilize the country. This pledge, if followed through, would offer Traoré an additional layer of protection, potentially deterring future coup attempts and foreign plots. In a continent where leaders have been punished for defying the global order, Captain Ibrahim Traoré stands as a symbol of a new African awakening. He walks a dangerous road, but one paved with the legacy of those who dared to dream of an Africa that governs itself. Despite mounting accusations, the government of Captain Ibrahim Traoré had not requested assistance from the Russian Wagner Group as of May 2023. Instead, Traoré made it clear that Burkina Faso was prepared to rely on its own forces to combat the wave of extremist insurgencies plaguing the country. Since assuming power on September 30, 2022, following the ousting of interim President Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba, Traoré has emerged not just as a leader, but as a symbol of generational change and resistance. At only 34 years old, he holds the distinction of being the world's youngest sitting president. His youth, however, is not a weakness. It is a source of dynamism that has re-energized Burkina Faso's political landscape. From the beginning of his tenure, Traoré made it clear that his loyalty lay not with foreign powers, but with the people of Burkina Faso. One of his first bold moves was the expulsion of French military forces in February 2023. These troops had been engaged in counterinsurgency operations, but their presence had long sparked public resentment, perceived as a form of neocolonial control. Following their withdrawal, Traoré expressed his openness to forming new alliances, emphasizing that any cooperation would be based on mutual respect and national sovereignty. This shift marked a significant turning point as Burkina Faso began exploring broader international partnerships not dictated by Western influence. In alignment with this vision, Traoré championed regional unity. He called on African nations to reject external control and instead harness their natural resources to build a stronger, more self-reliant continent. His words echoed the legacy of Pan-Africanists like Thomas Sankara, whose vision was similarly suppressed through Western-backed interference. Traoré's defiance has come at a cost. His time in power has been marked by repeated coup attempts, each one a reminder that those who challenge the status quo do so at great personal risk. There is growing speculation that some of these attempts were instigated or at least encouraged by Western intelligence networks, threatened by Traoré's anti-imperialist stance and his alignment with non-Western powers. In one recent incident, military intelligence uncovered a coup plot involving a group of officers attempting to seize power. The military prosecutor confirmed the arrest of 4 individuals, with 2 suspects still at large. Official statements indicated that the plot could have caused widespread chaos, suggesting involvement from foreign interests keen to destabilize the government. Despite the conspiracies, the capital city, Ouagadougou, remained largely calm. Supporters of Traoré took to the streets not in panic, but in protest, sending a loud and clear message that their president would not be removed so easily. It is increasingly evident that Traoré is not only difficult to replace, he is also heavily shielded by his deepening ties with Russia. With President Vladimir Putin standing behind him, both militarily and diplomatically, any Western-backed attempt to eliminate Traoré would risk igniting a geopolitical conflict that few are prepared to face. In this new era, removing a revolutionary leader like Traoré could carry the same consequences as touching a Russian ally: retaliation on a global scale. Interestingly, Ibrahim Traoré is not the only African leader seen as a threat to Western dominance. General Abdourahmane Tiani, the current president of Niger, has become one of the most prominent symbols of Africa's resistance to Western hegemony. After leading a successful coup in July 2023, that ousted pro-Western President Mohamed Bazoum. Tierney instantly disrupted long-standing geopolitical alignments in the Sahel region. His swift rejection of French influence and alignment with anti-Western forces placed him at odds with the interests of former colonial powers and their allies. What makes him a threat is not just the coup itself, but what the coup represents: the unraveling of Western political and military control in one of the most strategically important parts of West Africa. One of Tierney's most significant moves was the expulsion of French troops from Niger and the severing of military cooperation with Paris. For decades, France maintained a military presence in Niger under the guise of counter-terrorism operations, while simultaneously securing economic and political interests, particularly through uranium extraction, which is vital to France's nuclear energy supply. Tierney's decision to end this arrangement dealt a major blow to French strategic leverage in the region and sent a powerful signal to other African nations under similar influence. By challenging the presence of foreign troops, he positioned himself as a champion of African self-determination and anti-imperialist resistance. Furthermore, under Tierney's leadership, Niger joined a revolutionary military alliance with Mali and Burkina Faso, both governed by military regimes with strong anti-Western ideologies. This alliance, known as the Alliance of Sahel States, signals a dramatic shift in regional geopolitics. It represents a new bloc that rejects Western tutelage and seeks to form security, economic, and diplomatic partnerships on African terms, not those dictated by Washington, Paris, or Brussels. The potential for these nations to cooperate militarily and economically without Western approval undermines decades of influence building by the West and poses a direct challenge to institutions like ECOWAS and the African Union, which have often been aligned with Western interests. Tierney's administration has also embraced alternative global partnerships, notably with Russia. This pivot toward Moscow reflects a broader continental trend of African nations diversifying their alliances away from traditional Western powers. It also indicates that Niger under Tierney is looking to form partnerships based on mutual respect and sovereignty, rather than dependence. This development greatly unsettles the West, as it threatens to replace their role as the primary power brokers in Africa. In essence, General Abdourahmane Tierney is a threat to the West because he embodies a larger ideological shift sweeping across Africa. He represents a generation of African leaders unwilling to play by the old rules of foreign dependency, economic manipulation, and military subjugation. His rise to power is not just a national political event. It's a continental statement that the age of Western domination may be rapidly fading. Both Traoré and Abdourahmane Tierney, despite their ideological and generational differences, represent a growing wave of African leadership that refuses to be manipulated by external powers. Their commitment to sovereignty, self-reliance, and regional unity challenges the very foundations of Western geopolitical dominance in Africa. As history has shown, such defiance is often met with force. But this time, the stakes are higher, and so is the level of support among Africans tired of decades of exploitation. Also seen as a threat to the status quo is Kenyan President William Samoei Ruto, ranked third on the informal hit list of African leaders resisting Western influence. Born on December 21, 1966, Ruto became Kenya's fifth president on September 13, 2022. Prior to that, he served as the country's first elected deputy president from 2013 to 2022. Before constitutional reforms, the role of deputy president was simply an appointed position known as vice president. Ruto's political evolution has been marked by strategic resilience and a steady climb through Kenya's political ranks. Over the years, Ruto has held multiple ministerial roles, including as Minister of Home Affairs under President Daniel Arap Moi in 2002, Minister of Agriculture from 2008 to 2010 under President Mwai Kibaki, and later as Minister of Higher Education. During this time, he built a reputation as a shrewd political operator, capable of forging alliances and weathering political storms. Though he lost the ODM party's presidential nomination to Raila Odinga in 2007, he supported Odinga's campaign before eventually aligning with Uhuru Kenyatta for the 2013 and 2017 elections, serving as Kenyatta's deputy both times. Despite a political fallout, Kenyatta backed Odinga in the hotly contested 2022 election, positioning Ruto as an outsider. However, defying expectations and allegations of electoral fraud, none of which was substantiated by international observers, Ruto clinched the presidency under the United Democratic Alliance (UDA). Since taking office, President Ruto has emerged as a vocal advocate for African sovereignty and self-respect on the global stage. His critique of the Russia-Africa summit format, where all 54 African leaders were summoned to meet a single head of state, was searing and symbolic. Ruto deemed such meetings undignified and ineffective, urging the continent to adopt a more strategic approach. He proposed appointing special African envoys to engage with global powers, fostering deeper dialogue rather than superficial photo ops. This move challenged the deeply embedded imbalance in international diplomacy and called for Africa to be treated as a partner, not a subordinate. Ruto has also taken strong positions against Western interference in Africa's domestic affairs. At global forums, he has repeatedly denounced neocolonial practices and emphasized the need for the continent to forge its own path, politically, economically, and culturally. His administration has focused on building self-reliance, promoting intra-African trade, and reducing dependency on foreign aid. Ruto's patriotic rhetoric resonates with a growing segment of African leaders who are reclaiming the continent's autonomy and rejecting exploitative partnerships. Socially, Ruto has upheld conservative values and openly resisted the imposition of Western liberal ideologies, especially regarding LGBT+ rights. He has made it clear that such issues are not a national priority and reflect foreign cultural values that conflict with Kenyan traditions. His firm stance is part of a broader resistance to what many African leaders describe as moral imperialism, the attempt by the West to impose its social and cultural frameworks on African societies. Ruto's assertiveness on the world stage, his unapologetic push for African dignity, and his resistance to cultural colonization have not gone unnoticed by Western governments. Like Traoré, he is increasingly viewed as a disruptive force, a leader who challenges the post-colonial order and threatens the carefully maintained hierarchy of global influence. Add your voice to the total liberation of Africa by leaving a comment in the comments section below. Do not forget to like and subscribe for more informative videos like this one. Let's proceed. Rwandan President Paul Kagame is ranked 4th on the West's geopolitical hit list. Widely regarded as one of the most influential leaders in Africa, and arguably the world, Kagame has been Rwanda's president since the year 2000. Born on October 23, 1957, into a Tutsi family in southern Rwanda, Kagame's early life was shaped by upheaval. At just 2 years old, he and his family were forced to flee to Uganda during the Rwandan Revolution, which ended decades of Tutsi political dominance. In exile, Kagame's military and political acumen began to take shape. In the 1980s, he fought alongside Yoweri Museveni's rebel forces in Uganda, eventually rising to the rank of senior army officer when Museveni came to power. This experience laid the groundwork for Kagame's leadership of the Rwandan Patriotic Front, RPF, a rebel force that launched an invasion into Rwanda in 1990. After the death of Fred Wigema, Kagame assumed command of the RPF and orchestrated a military campaign that eventually ended the 1994 genocide, during which an estimated 800,000 Tutsis and moderate Hutus were slaughtered in one of the most horrific episodes in modern history. Following the genocide, Kagame became the de facto leader of Rwanda, holding the titles of vice president and Minister of Defense under President Pascu Bizimungu from 1994 until 2000. With Bizimungu's resignation, Kagame officially assumed the presidency, cementing his control over the nation. Kagame's leadership has been a study in contradictions. On one hand, Rwanda has experienced dramatic transformation under his rule, emerging as one of Africa's fastest developing nations. Infrastructure, healthcare, technology, and education have all flourished. On the other hand, Kagame's administration has been frequently criticized for authoritarian practices, including political repression, suppression of dissent, and silencing of opposition voices. Human rights organizations and Western governments often label Kagame as a dictator. However, his refusal to be subservient to foreign influence and his unflinching criticism of Western interference explains much of the animosity directed at him. He has openly challenged the West's moral authority, asking why Western powers refuse to be held accountable for their own crimes in Africa. Africa does not need adult supervision, Kagame has declared. In his 2009 inauguration speech, he condemned the use of foreign aid as political leverage and urged Africans to disregard foreign adventurers who lack legitimacy and connection to the people. He further denounced condescending Western commentators and bloggers who portray Africa through a lens of ignorance and superiority. Kagame's rejection of term limits was met with international criticism, yet many Rwandans supported the move, arguing that national stability and continued progress justified his extended tenure. By refusing to bow to Western pressure and by promoting a self-reliant, assertive Africa, Kagame has become a formidable symbol of defiance, and consequently, a high-value target for those who wish to keep Africa within the bounds of dependency. Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni is ranked fifth, a revolutionary figure and one of Africa's longest-serving leaders. Museveni has governed Uganda since 1986. Born on September 15, 1944, Museveni rose to power after leading a protracted guerrilla war that ousted Milton Obote's regime. His presidency began with hopes for democratic reform, but over the years, Museveni's administration has drawn criticism for its authoritarian tendencies, extended rule, and constitutional amendments that abolished presidential term limits. Despite this, Museveni's stance on foreign policy has positioned him as a vocal critic of Western hypocrisy. He has repeatedly asserted that China's diplomacy, non-intrusive and focused on infrastructure and trade, is more respectful than that of Western nations, who he accuses of meddling in African sovereignty. This ideological rift has placed Museveni at odds with the West for decades. The West's unease with Museveni stems not only from his long rule, but from his refusal to conform to the liberal democratic script imposed on African nations. His government has resisted Western-backed social reforms and promoted conservative values rooted in traditional African culture. This has often brought him under fire, especially concerning his positions on LGBTQ+ issues, but Museveni remains steadfast, seeing such pressures as a continuation of moral imperialism. To many in the West, Museveni is a relic of Cold War-era strongman politics. But to many Africans, he represents resilience and pragmatism. His long-standing alliance with Kagame and his foundational role in shaping East African geopolitics make him a formidable player, one not easily swayed or subdued. Museveni's presence on this list of so-called targets isn't just about his time in office. It's about his resistance to becoming a pawn in global power games. Museveni embodies a growing continental current, a rejection of Western paternalism, and a call for African self-determination. Since assuming power in 1986, Museveni has remained one of Africa's most enduring and polarizing leaders. Academics often describe his regime as either a liberal democracy or a competitive authoritarian system, terms that reflect the West's discomfort with his political model. Much of this unease stems not simply from his long rule, but from the fact that Museveni cannot be controlled. The Ugandan state has tightened control over media, and elections since the late 1980s have been widely criticized as neither transparent nor free. Still, Museveni persists, fueled by a worldview that prizes sovereignty over subservience. His presidency has spanned decades of domestic and regional turbulence. From military involvement in the First Congo War and the Rwandan Civil War, to crushing the brutal insurgency of the Lord's Resistance Army, Museveni has navigated Uganda through intense geopolitical storms. Constitutional amendments in 2005 and 2017 removed term and age limits, enabling him to remain in power indefinitely. In January 2021, he secured a sixth term with 58.6% of the vote amid allegations of voter fraud, inflated turnouts, and human rights violations, claims that were amplified by Western media and institutions, eager to frame him as a despotic ruler. One of the most controversial moves of his recent tenure was the passage of a sweeping anti-LGBTQ law, which includes provisions for the death penalty under certain conditions. The bill sparked global outrage, particularly from the West. But Museveni was defiant, stating unequivocally that the moral compass of Uganda, and Africa as a whole, will not be dictated by foreign powers. In his view, the law is not merely about cultural values, it's a stand against Western moral imperialism. The backlash was swift. In August, the World Bank suspended funding to Uganda, citing a conflict with its institutional values. US President later announced that Uganda could be expelled from the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, a vital trade partnership, due to Museveni's refusal to act as a Western puppet. This reaction highlights the deeper conflict at play. Museveni's anti-colonial ideology is rooted in historical memory, the enduring trauma of European colonization in Africa, and the decades of economic manipulation that followed. His criticism of the West is framed not simply as rebellion, but as a defense of Uganda's sovereignty and self-determination. Time and again, he has resisted what he perceives as neocolonial interference in domestic affairs, asserting that the path of the Ugandan people must be chosen by Ugandans themselves. In response to the World Bank's funding cut, Museveni declared that Uganda would seek alternative sources of financing and work to reduce dependency on Western institutions. His message is clear. Economic sovereignty is the next frontier in Africa's liberation struggle. It is not merely about rejecting loans or conditions. It is about breaking free from the structural leverage foreign powers hold over African nations. Yet this raises a critical question. Why does defending national sovereignty make a leader an enemy of the West? Museveni's real offense may not be his longevity, his controversial laws, or even his aggressive rhetoric. Rather, it is his refusal to conform, his unwillingness to submit Uganda's destiny to external influence. For this, he is feared, vilified, and targeted. But in the eyes of many across the continent, he is a symbol of resistance, a relic of revolutionary Pan-Africanism who refuses to fade quietly into history. Colonel Assimi Goïta, Mali's interim president, stands as the sixth figure on the West's unofficial hit list of defiant African leaders. Since assuming office on May 28, 2021, Goïta has emerged as a formidable force in African politics. Born around 1980, he initially rose to prominence as the head of the National Committee for the Salvation of the People, the military body that led the ousting of former President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta during the 2020 coup d'état. After leading a second successful coup in 2021, which saw the removal of interim leader Bah Ndaw, Goïta officially became Mali's transitional president. From that moment, Goïta made it clear that Mali was entering a new chapter, one of sovereign self-determination. His bold moves rattled Western powers who had long maintained strategic and economic influence over Mali. His government systematically dismantled French dominance in the country, expelling French troops, banning French-funded NGOs, and revoking French as Mali's official language. These acts were not just symbolic. They were structural changes aimed at reclaiming national autonomy. Ruto also took steps to neutralize foreign narratives by suspending operations of Western media outlets such as France 24 and Radio France Internationale, which he accused of spreading misinformation and undermining Mali's sovereignty. During Eid al-Adha prayers at Bamako's Grand Mosque in July 2021, an assassination attempt was made on his life. Although he was unharmed and the attacker was swiftly apprehended, the incident exposed the extent of threats surrounding leaders who dared to challenge the global order. His resistance to foreign aid, especially aid tied to political conditions, speaks volumes. By rejecting Western charity with strings attached, Ruto sends an unambiguous message: Mali will no longer be a pawn in global power games. His stance represents a broader continental awakening, as African leaders increasingly assert that the era of external control is coming to an end. Now the question arises: can the West still eliminate defiant African leaders with impunity, as it has done in decades past? Or has the world changed too much for such conspiracies to succeed in silence? With growing public awareness, Pan-African solidarity, and rising skepticism toward neocolonialism, the West's dominance is no longer guaranteed. If African leaders know they are being targeted for prioritizing sovereignty, then they must act decisively. They must strengthen regional alliances, invest in homegrown intelligence and defense, and create independent economic frameworks that shield their nations from external coercion. Only through unity, vigilance, and strategic planning can Africa protect its most courageous voices from being silenced. Tell us what you think in the comments section below. We explore the rich history, culture, and the ongoing struggle for sovereignty in Africa. Join us in this important conversation by subscribing to our channel. By subscribing, you're not just staying informed, you're becoming part of a movement dedicated to reclaiming Africa's rightful place on the global stage.